Leonardo da Vinci's mysterious DNA could be in his art.
Da Vinci, we can fairly say, was practically obsessed with it.
Researchers have been looking for it in his letters and a specific drawing. They say that they found a matching sequence of Y chromosomes.
Scientists just decoded Leonardo da Vinci's DNA, and the results blindsided everyone. This is the man who left no children, no confirmed grave, and no biological trace anyone could find for 500 years. His genetic blueprint was considered permanently out of reach. Then a team of researchers cracked it open using a 21-generation family tree, forensic genetics, and the one source nobody thought to check. What came back rewrites the story, not just what it reveals about Leonardo.
Vinci is one of a long line of artists who have told us, beginning with the ancient Egyptians and running through the early Christians and Tibetans, that art is a medium, it's a conduit.
But what it reveals about where he actually came from, what his face actually looked like, and the biological architecture behind the most extraordinary mind in human history. The man who left no heirs. Here is the paradox at the center of this story. Leonardo da Vinci, the man who mapped the human body before modern medicine existed, designed flying machines 400 years before anyone could build them, and filled 7,000 pages of notebooks with ideas so advanced they are still being decoded, left behind. Zero recoverable biological trace. Not a confirmed bone, not a verified skull, not a single strand of DNA that anyone, for 5 centuries, could point to and say, that came from him.
These are not books. You cannot compare that to a work by Galileo or by Newton, because they have solved the problems before writing their books.
He was born on April 15th, 1452, the illegitimate son of a notary and a peasant woman in the Tuscan town of Vinci. He dissected more than 30 human corpses to understand the body from the inside out. He wrote his private notebooks in mirror script, right to left, left-handed, so that no one could read over his shoulder. Giorgio Vasari, the Renaissance art historian who compiled Lives of the Artists in 1550, described him as a man of divine beauty, supernatural grace, and intellectual power so vast that the people around him were simply bewildered. Vasari wrote that, within living memory of people who had actually known Leonardo, and even then, the descriptions read like accounts of someone who didn't quite belong to the world he lived in. And then, in 1519, he died in France at 67. He left behind the Mona Lisa, The Last Supper, anatomical studies of unmatched precision, engineering blueprints generations ahead of their time. Here's what he didn't leave behind: children, a direct bloodline, or any recoverable biological trace. That last part is what makes this story extraordinary, because a team of researchers just changed it.
These strange sort of horn-like structures are ligaments observed by Leonardo in a cow.
The problem with ghosts. Here's why this took so long, and why the obstacles are so extreme that what scientists are now achieving should not have been possible. Problem 1, no confirmed remains. Leonardo was buried at the Collegiate Church of Saint-Florentin at Château d'Amboise in France. The French Revolution didn't treat aristocratic burial sites gently. Churches were desecrated, graveyards were disturbed, records were lost. In 1863, a partial skeleton was recovered from the ruins and reinterred at the nearby Chapel of Saint Hubert. Most historians believe this is Leonardo. The identification has never been scientifically confirmed. No. Verified skull, no confirmed bones. Nothing anyone can point to with certainty. Problem 2, no direct descendants. When scientists identified the bones of King Richard III, they found a living maternal line descendant and matched mitochondrial DNA, clean, direct, elegant. That only works when a direct line exists. Leonardo had no children. The line died with him. Problem 3, contamination across 5 centuries. Every painting, drawing, and letter Leonardo touched has since been handled by curators, restorers, collectors, and museum staff across dozens of generations. The same drawing that Leonardo pressed chalk into in 1490 has been touched barehanded by every scholar who encountered it since. All of them left biological material behind. Sorting his signal from 500 years of accumulated noise is a forensic problem of almost incomprehensible complexity. Think about what that means. No body, no descendants, and every object he ever touched is biologically contaminated by half. A millennium of human hands. A team of researchers looked at that problem and decided to solve it anyway. If you want to be in the room when this result is finally confirmed, subscribe right now and hit the bell. This is the kind of story that breaks overnight. The Leonardo da Vinci DNA Project. In 2016, Alessandro Vezzosi and Agnese Sabato launched the Leonardo da Vinci DNA Project. Vezzosi is the founder of the Museo Ideale Leonardo da Vinci in Italy and one of the foremost Leonardo scholars alive. Sabato is president of the Leonardo da Vinci Heritage Association. These were not outsiders chasing a famous name. These were people who had spent their careers inside the Da Vinci historical record. In the Tuscan archives, in the museums, in the very towns where Leonardo's family had lived and died for generations. For Vezzosi, this project was personal in a way that went beyond scholarship. He had spent decades studying Leonardo's notebooks, his paintings, his anatomy drawings, documents that captured the interior life of a mind unlike any other in recorded history. The question of what Leonardo actually looked like, what his body was built from, what biological architecture produced that particular genius, it had no answer. Vezzosi intended to find one. The approach required 3 parallel tracks: build the genealogical record from the ground up, locate any surviving male line relatives who could provide modern DNA, develop a protocol for extracting ancient DNA from irreplaceable artifacts without destroying them.
The detail that was painted over was a scene of a pagan temple.
Each track alone would be a career-defining research project, all 3 at once, integrated and mutually verifiable. That was what they were attempting. Here's what nobody expected to find at the end of the genealogical track. The focus was the Y chromosome, the genetic sequence passed virtually unchanged from father to son, generation after generation. Because Leonardo had no direct descendants, the team traced his lineage through collateral male lines, brothers, half-brothers, uncles, cousins, and their descendants cascading forward across centuries. Through painstaking cross-referencing of baptismal records, marriage certificates, tax documents, and death registers, they built a 21-generation family tree stretching all the way back to 1331, nearly 200 years before Leonardo's birth. At the end of that chain, they found living people. The living relatives. Leonardo da Vinci has living relatives in Tuscany right now. Not descendants, he had no children, but through his father's line, through the legitimate half-brothers, Ser Piero fathered through 2 marriages, and through their sons and grandsons cascading forward across 7 centuries, the researchers identified at least 15 living individuals who share Leonardo's paternal Y chromosome lineage. Among them, at least 6 confirmed living male line members of the Da Vinci family, men alive today, men who had no idea what was coming when Vezzosi's team contacted them. The researchers reached out to each of them one by one. Some already knew about the family connection. Others had no idea at all. Each agreed to provide a cheek swab, a simple DNA sample that would, for the first time in history, allow scientists to map the Y chromosome profile of the Da Vinci paternal line. And this is where it gets genuinely strange. The results placed their Y chromosomes in a haplogroup called E1b1b, a lineage that originated in East Africa, spread through North Africa, and moved into Southern Europe thousands of years ago, found in meaningful frequencies across Tuscany and the Italian peninsula, entirely consistent with Leonardo's known geographic origins. On its own, that confirms nothing specific about Leonardo, but it gives researchers something they never had before: a molecular fingerprint, a target, a biological reference point to search for across 5 centuries of surviving material. The fingerprint existed. Now they had to find it in the past. The logic was this: if ancient DNA recovered from Da Vinci family tombs in the Vinci region matched the living relative's Y chromosome profile, they could establish what Leonardo's own Y chromosome looked like. And if DNA recovered from objects he personally handled matched that same profile, they'd have triangulated the strongest biological case for his genetic identity that 500 years of silence had ever allowed. Vezzosi's team turned toward the tombs, and then toward something no one had thought to try.
This particular drawing is one of the finest examples of Leonardo trying to understand how the shoulder works purely in mechanical terms.
DNA on the canvas. One of the most promising sources of Leonardo's DNA isn't a tomb. It isn't a bone. It isn't a strand of preserved hair. It's the art itself. When a person works with their hands for hundreds of hours, mixing pigments, pressing chalk to paper, handling brushes and manuscripts, they leave biological material on everything they touch. Skin cells, saliva, the oils from their fingertips, microscopic traces that 5 centuries of handling, humidity and light exposure mostly destroy. Mostly. The team developed a non-destructive sampling protocol, gentle swabbing techniques borrowed from forensic crime scene investigation, and applied them to Renaissance-era artifacts with confirmed or probable connections to Leonardo. One of the key objects tested was a red chalk drawing called Holy Child, a work some scholars tentatively associate with Leonardo, or his immediate workshop. Researchers took samples from areas most likely to have been in sustained contact with the creating artist's hands. Too much pressure destroys an irreplaceable artwork. Too little yields nothing, a razor-thin margin. And Vesosi's team walked it. They also analyzed historical letters written by known members of Leonardo's family, establishing a comparative baseline, a familial DNA signature against which anything recovered from the art could be measured. Then the 2023 preprint paper was published. Publicly available, open to scientific scrutiny, not yet through formal peer review. But the data was there. The Y chromosome DNA fragments recovered from the tested artifacts fell within the E1b1b haplogroup, the exact same lineage carried by the living relatives. The fingerprint matched. 5 centuries collapsed to a single data point. Ancient DNA shows specific chemical damage patterns. Cytosine bases at the ends of fragments convert to uracil over time, leaving a molecular signature that forensic geneticists can read like a timestamp. The fragments found on the artifacts showed those damage patterns. They were not modern contamination. They were ancient. They were real, and they matched. For the first time in 500 years, scientists were holding a molecular fragment that may have been part of Leonardo da Vinci's body, a biological trace of the hands that held the brush that painted the Mona Lisa. When Vesosi's team saw those damage patterns confirmed in the sequencing data, the room went quiet. This was the moment built toward across years of archival work. Thousands of pages of genealogical records, a family tree reaching back 7 centuries. The silence lasted only a moment, then the next question arrived, because this was not the end. It was the beginning of what the DNA could actually tell them.
I believe Leonardo is the most important dominant personality, made the most contributions in the most areas during those 1,000 years.
What the genes could reveal. Assume the project reaches its final goal, that researchers recover and sequence enough verified DNA to reconstruct a reliable genetic portrait of Leonardo da Vinci. What would we actually learn? First, what he actually looked like. For 500 years, our image of Leonardo has been filtered entirely through art, portraits by other painters, and the famous Turin drawing of an elderly bearded man many scholars believe is a self-portrait from his 60s. Pigment on paper cannot confirm eye color. It cannot confirm the tone of his complexion, the texture of his hair, the biological reality behind the representation. Modern genomics can make probabilistic predictions about all of those things. These are not certainties, but they provide a biological baseline that no portrait ever could. And get this, researchers are also asking something deeper. Leonardo is documented as left-handed, writing in mirror script while drawing with his right hand, painting comfortably with both. Some scholars have controversially suggested his neurological profile may have included features associated with ADHD, autism, or exceptional perceptual processing, possibly explaining both his extraordinary visual acuity and his legendary inability to finish projects. Genetic markers associated with visual processing, bilateral neural dexterity, and working memory are active areas of current genomic research. Nobody expects a genius gene, but the questions are real, and the data would matter. Then there's authentication. The art market for works attributed to Leonardo runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Disputed attributions generate scholarly wars that last decades. If DNA recovered from a painting surface matched a verified Leonardo genetic profile, it would not be proof of authorship on its own, but it would be the most direct physical evidence ever brought to bear on disputes that currently hinge entirely on stylistic analysis. Biological corroboration would be revolutionary. That's not just remarkable, that's a different kind of art history entirely.
We know that Da Vinci did use this mirroring technique.
So, close but not there yet. Here's the honest picture, and the honest picture is more exciting than the overstated one. What researchers have confirmed, a 21-generation family tree traced to 1331, living male line relatives in Tuscany, carrying a Y chromosome signature consistent with Leonardo's geographic and ancestral origins. Ancient Y chromosome DNA fragments recovered from Renaissance-era artifacts that show the correct chemical damage patterns and fall within the E1b1b haplogroup matching the living relatives. What they have not confirmed yet, whether those artifact fragments specifically came from Leonardo rather than from another Da Vinci family member, a workshop assistant, or a handler from the centuries that followed. The 2023 preprint had not yet cleared formal peer review. The fragments are not sufficient on their own to reconstruct a full genome. They need to be triangulated against ancient remains from the family tombs in the Vinci region, where excavation work is still ongoing. Here's what nobody is saying out loud. The contamination problem never fully disappears. A curator at a major Italian museum in the 1970s may have handled the same drawing repeatedly over a 30-year career. A 19th century restorer's DNA is on that paper. Every scholar who examined it without gloves left something behind. Ancient DNA damage patterns work like carbon dating, a way of reading age in the molecule itself. But 5 centuries is a long time for a signal to fade. These are not dead ends. These are the final obstacles. The tomb excavations and Vinci are in progress. The peer review is moving. Vezzosi and Sabato are not starting over. They are closer to the finish line than they have ever been. This is not the story of a failed attempt. This is the story of a scientific race in its final lap, with the most extraordinary prize in the history of forensic genetics at the end. Why this changes everything? Some people ask, does it actually matter? The Mona Lisa exists either way. The notebooks exist. Whatever haplogroup Leonardo da Vinci belonged to doesn't change the fact of what he created. That's fair. But here's what it misses. This project is a proof of concept for something that has never existed before. If scientists can reconstruct a reliable genetic profile of someone who died 5 centuries ago, left no direct descendants, had their burial site disturbed, and whose possessions have been handled by the entire world, using genealogical archival research, living collateral relatives, ancient tomb remains, and trace DNA from artworks, then this methodology works. And if it works for Leonardo, it works for others. Every historical figure whose remains are uncertain, whose identity is disputed, whose biological reality has been sealed by time. This approach could reach them. For the art world, the implications extend to every contested Renaissance work in every major collection on Earth. Not just Leonardo, every master, every workshop, every drawing whose origin is still argued in climate-controlled vaults. Think about that for a second. This is a fusion of archival genealogy, forensic genetics, classical scholarship, and material science that has never been done at this level before. A 21-generation family tree built from Tuscan church records, cross-referenced against living DNA from men who had no idea they were part of the story. That's a different kind of science entirely.
The flower of life is the information behind how the universe was created.
Reading the blueprint. The family tree stretches back to 1331, before the Black Death, before the height of the Renaissance, before the rise and fall of the Florentine Republic. Vezzosi's team traced a biological thread across 700 years of European history, through plague and war and revolution, through the upheaval that disturbed Leonardo's own grave and scattered what remained of him into uncertain ground. And at the end of that 700-year thread, they found living people. Men alive today in Tuscany who carry in their chromosomes a molecular echo of the same bloodline that produced the most extraordinary creative mind in recorded history. Here is what is specifically unexpected. The EE1B1B haplogroup, confirmed in the living relatives and recovered from the artifacts, traces back not to Renaissance Italy, but to East Africa, through North Africa, into the Italian peninsula, thousands of years before Leonardo was born. The genetic story of his ancestry reaches further, and in a more unexpected direction, than 500 years of European art history ever suggested. And the neurological picture emerging from the research, markers potentially linked to exceptional perceptual processing, bilateral dexterity, the particular kind of attention that produces both visionary genius and an inability to declare a painting finished, does not describe a mystery. It describes a biology, specific, recoverable, readable, beginning, fragment by fragment, to come into focus. Every confirmed ancient fragment is one more sentence of a biological text, sealed since 1519. Every sample from a family tomb in Vinci is one more data point, closing the distance between us and him. The research is not finished. The full genome is not yet reconstructed, but the decode is actively in progress, piece by piece, fragment by fragment, in laboratories and archives doing something that has never been done before. There is a passage in Leonardo's notebooks where he writes about the eye as the window of the soul and the intellect as the tool through which human beings understand the world they inhabit. He wrote as if understanding was an obligation, as if the universe offered itself to be known, and the only acceptable response was to look closer, and then closer still. He applied that standard to anatomy, to fluid mechanics, to the behavior of light on water, to the precise curvature of a human lip. He was relentless about it in a way the people around him found both inspiring and slightly unnerving. The scientists working on the Leonardo da Vinci DNA project are doing exactly that. They are looking as hard as they can at the biological traces left by a man who looked harder than anyone in history. After 5 centuries of silence, the genes are beginning to speak. And what they say next, about his eyes, his face, the neurological architecture of the most extraordinary mind ever recorded, the biological blueprint behind the Mona Lisa and 7,000 pages of world-changing notebooks, that is the revelation that nobody saw coming. Not the historians, not the geneticists, not even the team that found it. When this project publishes its final, confirmed results, it will rewrite what we know about Leonardo da Vinci, and it will rewrite what we believed was possible in forensic science. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because when that moment arrives, you do not want to find out from someone else.